I actually fell into the position of sitting and doing a talk radio show about 12 or 14 years ago. I'm not a professional. I didn't plan on doing it professionally. I didn't study to do it. I just happened to be at the right place and the right time when circumstance occurred. The name is Jeff. It's Westside Jeff. I sitting in tonight for Chris Krok. Chris is off this week. I'll be filling in tonight, tomorrow, and then Friday. And when I did talk radio out of the get-go, part of my motivation to being a talk show host and doing talk radio was I saw that common sense is missing in business and industry and government everywhere I turn. I'm finding I'm talking to friends and family and they're just not making sense and people are saying stupid crap. And I just have an opinion on it. And that got me in talk radio. And it culminates with tonight. And it culminates with tonight because, quite honestly, in all the years I've been doing talk radio, today, after this weekend, after the last 3 days, and today culminates with probably the biggest news days of my life in talk radio. The biggest. There are a lot of stories going on. There are a lot of things that impact you and me. There are things that people are shooting me messages across social media saying, hey, Jeff, what does this mean? What is this about? And we're going to break it down tonight. The name is Jeff. It's Westside Jeff. I'm sitting in for Chris Krok. Chris is back a week from now. You can hit me up on social media at Westside Jeff. I reached out earlier today to someone who is a perfect expert to join me, and he's going to be with us for as long as we can. And I want to encourage you to jump in and add your input. If you got a question, I'm seeing all these questions across social media. I'm trying to put them all together so I can be a part of it because I'm asking a lot of the same questions and have my same opinions. But there's many of you that have questions, thoughts, and opinions that maybe I haven't hit yet. So I want to hear from you. So if you want to weigh in, pick up the phone and call. The phone number is 800-288-9227. That's 800-288-WBAP. Joining me is Mark Weaver. Mark is, let me find his bio. Sorry, I don't have it right in front of me. Mark Weaver is a former spokesman for the U.S. Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. He worked in the Reagan administration. He worked for Ronald Reagan, President Reagan. He was a spokesman for the DOJ. So he knows how the Department of Justice works. And all the talk that I've heard over weeks to come that we are weaponizing law enforcement, Mark was a part of that eons ago. He can speak very intelligently about it. He also served as Deputy Attorney General of Ohio. He lives up in Columbus, Ohio. I knew him when I lived up in Columbus. I'm born and raised from Columbus, but I knew Mark then. Mark is a member of the U.S. Supreme Court Bar. He often teaches constitutional law. By the way, I saw an interview earlier today on CNN where they went to a constitutional law professor at Princeton and asked questions, and I just about come unglued. That's when I'm like, okay, I'm calling Mark. Mark's got to be the guy because he's taught constitutional law at the Ohio State University Law School up in Columbus, Ohio, but also does it at the School of Government at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He's also a brilliant author of a book called A Wordsmith's Work. You can find that on Amazon. I would encourage you. It's a great read. Check it out, A Wordsmith's Work. And he penned an op-ed today for Newsweek magazine. This guy is someone you've seen, you've heard, you've talked about, you've read his stuff before. You're going to have a chance to ask him questions if you want tonight right here on WBAP. Mark Weaver, thanks for taking the time to join me. Mark, as I said a moment ago, today is singularly probably the biggest day in my life as a talk show radio host with all the news going on. I want to hit all these topics. Let's hit them real quick. Just tell people what we want to talk about. I want to talk about the Joe Biden presidency. A lot of fallout from Thursday and the presidential debate and what Democrats are doing. I have some strong opinions on what's going to happen. Mark also owns a company called Communications Council. It's a political strategist firm that handles a lot of races across the United States, including U.S. Senate races and U.S. House races. We'll talk about that in a little bit. A second story I want to talk about is the SCOTUS Supreme Court today dealt a blow to Trump's prosecution, ruling on broad immunity and protecting the office of the president. And just a little while ago, President Joe Biden went out and spoke negatively about it and said the Supreme Court got it wrong. Third things, Supreme Court avoiding final decision on state regulation of social media that came up out of Texas, right here in Texas. We'll talk about that. A fourth story, earlier today, Steve Bannon reported to a low-security prison in Danbury, Connecticut. That's political persecution. You see, they couldn't imprison Trump, so they go after a surrogate. They got Bannon, and by the way, he serves 4 months. Let's see, today's July 1, 4 months, August, September, October. Oh, takes it through November. So they went after Bannon. The U.S. military today heightened the security status alert across European bases due to a combination of threats. And then a case that came down Friday that really impacts all this too, Chevron deference. We'll get into that too. Mark, thanks for taking the time to listen to me rant about this. This is a really big day, and people need to know what's going on, how to break it down, how to think, and I'm sure they'll have some questions. We'll ask them for their opinions. Of those stories I just talked about, what's the biggest one for you, Mark?
So many to choose from. What a buffet of crazy things happening.
It's nuts.
Most of us have not seen in our lifetime. I suppose if someone's in their 80s or 90s, they could tell us about what was going on during World War II, perhaps. But my goodness, I think the greatest of these stories is the fact that millions of Americans found out last week that their commander-in-chief, he's not only not up for that 3 a.m. phone call that we talk about in political ads, he's probably not even up for the 3 p.m. phone call about some world crisis, and that's downright scary.
Clearly. Let's start there. My 2 cents worth is this. It's as you watch. First of all, I was watching the debate the other night, and right after the debate, I turned to CNN. I want to see what the opposing viewpoint is. And they were talking as if somebody had died. I've never seen all the analysts on the CNN set talking like they did as if someone died. That's when you knew it was dire. And a lot of fallout since, which we got to cover. Biden went to Joe and Jill went to Camp David. They hid, and they are politically strategizing on what to do. My 2 cents worth on that is this. Jill is in control. Joe's asking Jill, hey, honey, what do you think about this? And she's saying, you're a good man. You got good policies. You answered all the questions, and you're going to be the president of the United States the next 4 years, and nobody's going to take it away from you. That's what's really going on.
Yeah, there's an Edith Wilson quality about this. Edith Wilson was the first lady when Woodrow Wilson had a stroke, and she put him in a bedroom and let nobody come in, and when they would hand her things to sign, presidential actions, and she would say, I'll go in and meet with the president, when really she would go in, put his hand in hers, and she would sign for him because he had no idea what he was signing. Not quite as bad as that, but there's certainly shades of that happening right now.
At least we don't think it's quite as bad as that. But how do we know? Guess what? The media, the role of the media is to be the watchdog of the government, the watchdog of the community. And the national reporting news media have not done their job for the last couple of years because this man's been in decline. You and I and listeners of this station have known it all along, but the Democrats have been defending him all along. And there's been a dog whistle in the Democratic circles that they know he's declining. They just want to hide from it, and then all of a sudden Thursday night he bombs. They go, what the hell? Oh my God, what happened? Guess what? You guys been covering it up. This has been a cover-up. This has been coming all along. It's a real problem. Mark, you're going to be with me for the rest of the night. I need to hit a break on the other side of this. I want to throw you my theory on what I think is going on behind the scenes with Team Biden and the Team DNC in the White House and what they're all doing on damage control. I want to spell out what I see it's going. I want you to poke holes in it and tell me, am I close? Am I not? You've been on the inside. I want your input. Good with that?
Yeah, let's do it. Listeners have a lot to take in tonight, so let's get started right after this break.
Westside Jeff in for Chris Krok. We'll be back in about 4 minutes on News Talk 820 WBAP and now on FM at 93.3. Westside Jeff in for Chris Krok on News Talk 820 WBAP. As I said moments ago, today is probably as big of a day in the world of talk radio that I've ever experienced because of all the news stories. And they're very significant. Supreme Court ruling, Steve Bannon going to prison. They couldn't imprison Trump, so they go after Bannon. He serves 4 months. He reports today. Friday's case about Chevron deference comes into play. But the big story I want to start with is Thursday night's debate. Now, listen, you and I saw that, whether you watched it, listened to it, or didn't at all, you know the story. Joe Biden is not equipped for being the president of the United States today. His mental acuity is not there. It's concerning. It's concerning to the Democrats. It's been concerning to you and me. It's been concerning all across talk radio. The only ones that haven't said it's a problem are his cabinet and the folks in a position of power. Joining me is Mark Weaver. Mark is an expert in this area. Mark is former spokesman for the United States Department of Justice in Washington. He was in the Reagan administration in the DOJ. All the talk going into weaponization of law enforcement, Mark was on the inside back when Reagan was in office. And trust me, we'll talk about it in a little bit, that things have changed since Mark was in it. He is a member of the U.S. Supreme Court Bar. He often he teaches constitutional law at several universities. And today he penned an op-ed in Newsweek magazine about the Supreme Court ruling today about the Trump immunity case. You can check that out in Newsweek. I want to get into my opinion on what I think has happened since Thursday night. Now, my background, for years, I worked in the political sales arena in the media business. So I understand political law, election law. I'm not an attorney. I didn't go to law school. But when you do it for 30 years, you kind of learn it by de facto, to the point that I worked for another big broadcaster, and I used to have a direct line to the chief legal counsel officer there, that many times I'd have conversations with them where it were spirited conversations, and there were times I made that person change his mind based off some of the things I said. And he said to me a couple times, "You really know your stuff. Are you sure you didn't go to law school?" And I'm like, "No, I didn't." It's very convoluted, which is what Trump went through in the case in New York. So I'm using my common sense, putting it all together, my experience in the election law arena and the elections procedures arena and in the political space arena. And here's my 2 cents worth. And I want to throw it by Mark. And Mark, I want you to poke holes through it and tell me, am I close? For now, I think Team Biden, first of all, you have to make there's a differentiation between President Biden in the White House as the President of the United States and President Biden as a candidate. Those two paths should not cross. So Jean-Pierre in the White House, she can't speak on behalf of the re-election campaign, and the re-election folks can't speak on behalf of the White House. So you have to keep those things separate. So there's multiple parties involved, which makes it challenging for the guy that doesn't know that. But for now, Team Biden, and that means President Biden in the White House and candidate Biden on the other side, as well as Team DNC, the Democratic National Committee, are doing all kinds of damage control. They're trying to get their most important influencers and their surrogates to sing from the same hymnal and continue to support Joe Biden. And they literally worked through Thursday night and Friday to get messaging out so that everybody was saying the same thing. They all know Thursday was not just a bad night, rather a devastating night. The American people have seen this coming from Joe ever since he's been in office, tripping up and down the stairs of Air Force One, all the verbal blunders, all the moments of him freezing up and not knowing where he was and not answering questions, all the moments he's been on the world stage and turned around to shake someone's hand and there wasn't anybody there, and the times he turned around to walk off stage one way and they grabbed him and turned him the other. We've seen this coming. This is not new. It's just the media had covered it up by now, and the Democrats have not identified it. So the American electorate, especially those of us on the right, we've been talking about this for 2 years or so, and even Democrats and Democratic supporters have discussed these things privately. They've never gone public until Thursday night. It's sort of a dog whistle for them. But after Thursday night, Those dog whistles cannot be ignored. This isn't an issue of, is this man cognizant enough to last 4 more years? This now becomes an issue, a question of, is he capable of executing the office of the president today and for the next 6 months? You see, the important Democrats whose opinions drive action, and I'm talking folks like, don't forget Representative James Clyburn down in South Carolina. That's why Biden is in office, because Clyburn saved him, had him win the South Carolina primary, and that proceeded through the primaries. Nancy Pelosi, Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer. Those are some of the key folks we know on the Democratic side. They're all saying the right things today, publicly, but behind closed doors, they have real questions. But they're saying the right things. But trust me when I tell you that they are all buying time. That's what this is about. They're buying time, and the truth comes in 2 to 3 weeks. Because I believe that Team Biden and his re-election team are deploying a game plan that includes multiple layers. And the layers include, first and foremost, they want those closest to Joe and his campaign to be on message in support of Joe. And they've got talking points out. That's why they're all saying the same thing. That's playing out now for the most part. And you're seeing it across multiple media outlets. The second thing is they are celebrating the 4th of July holiday because that buys them time with voters, with folks who donate money, because our attentions turn away from Joe and turn away from politics towards celebrating the 4th of July and the holiday, family and friends and summer vacations. Now, secondly, this gives Team Biden 2 weeks to change that narrative. And that's what they're going to try to do. For 2 weeks, they're going to try to change the narrative. They'll get him out in front of people, show he's not incompetent, show that he's not a president with dementia who's capable of holding the office and making tough decisions. They did it tonight with a press conference with a teleprompter in front of him. He just did that a little while ago. Next, they want to review polling data. This is the key. They're going to look at polling data from several reputable sources to see what it reflects. If every poll shows Joe numbers with irreparable harm, no recovery, and no turning it around, he's done. He's gone. He will not be the candidate. If there's a hint of any good news at all, that maybe they can turn things around, the next thing these Democrats in power will do is turn to fundraising arms. They'll go to all the big fundraisers. They'll go where the big money donors are, the big money individuals and the big money organizations. Don't ever underestimate the power of labor unions, IBEW, AFSCME, Priorities USA. Those are the big organizations where the money comes from. They're going to go back to them to solidify their support in Joe Biden. They'll want to get out front of all the fundraising to make sure that the funds don't dry up. And if they do, if the funds dry up, Biden's toast. Next, Team Biden re-election will manage to look at the down ballot races. If the down ballot races, if those candidates have a concern about this and affecting their campaign, that presents another problem. I'll explain that after the news. Mark, thank you for holding on with me. You're here in my long tirade, but I believe this is what's going on. I want to hear your opinion after the news. I get bottom of the hour news. In fact, Sean Allen dropped a note on my desk to talk about an update on what Biden said just a little while ago, but also a merger between Cedar Fair that affects us in our local economy here. We'll get to that right after the news. Again, I'm going to tell you what I think is going on in the Democratic Party. I want to finish that up. And then, Mark, I want to ask your opinion on that and shoot holes in it, and we'll be able to take some calls. Fair with you, Mark?
Yeah, I'll be ready. Let's do it.
All right. I'm Westside Jeff in for Chris Krok. About 2 minutes from now is the news. On the other side of that, we'll continue this conversation. Westside Jeff in for Chris Krok and News Talk 820 WBAP. Westside Jeff in for Chris Krok. Chris is off this week. I'll be covering tonight, tomorrow, and Friday. Chris is back next week. We're talking about all the news of the day and the events, and the lead story to me is still the fallout of the Biden-Trump debate the other night, because people keep asking me where I go, hey, Jeff, do you think Biden's going to step down? What do you think is going to happen? That seems to be topic A. That's the thing that people are asking most. What my opinion is on that. And joining me tonight is Mark Weaver. Mark is a former spokesman with the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. in the Reagan administration. So he knows how Washington works. And a lot of these stories come back to something that Mark can talk about. Mark also is a professor of constitutional law at several universities across the United States. He teaches constitutional law, so he knows it. If you want to weigh in on this, if you have questions about some of this, jump in, 800-288-9227. It's 800-288-WBAP. I said a moment ago that I think what's going on behind the scenes is a bigger story right now that you and I don't know. I have some insight with my background in the political advertising space and big companies across the country and dealing with presidential candidates and other candidates. Here's my thought. My thought on the fallout from Thursday night is Team Biden is doing everything they can damage control. That starts with getting with their immediate surrogates to sing from the same hymnal, which they did over the weekend. It also buys them time. They are all buying time for 2 to 3 weeks out. They want to see a lot of polling data, not just one poll or two polls. They want to see a dozen polls on what it's showing in voter sentiment. And the good news for them, and I talk about this all the time when I'm on the air, and that is the Friday afternoon news dump. You've got to be concerned about Friday afternoon news dump. If you're going to dump bad news, you do it on a Friday afternoon. And if you want the hat trick, you do it on a Friday afternoon sometime around a big holiday, July 4th. At a time when consumers' minds, voters' minds are somewhere else, summer vacation. So this benefits them. They have a pass right now for a week because of July 4th. So it buys them some time. But here's what I think the Biden administration, the Biden team is doing. They're trying to manage those expectations. They're trying to get him out front of some of these things. That's why he came out a little while ago and did a press conference from the White House with a podium covering up all his inefficiencies and a teleprompter so he could read from it, made it look like he knew what he was talking about. And he condemned the Supreme Court on the ruling today, which we'll come back to. They're going to watch the numbers. They're going to watch fundraising. They're going to watch what happens. And if Biden is bad in all those, I think Joe Biden is toast, and I think they replace him. The next thing they do is they look at down ballot races. You have to understand down ballot races are very, very important. When I talk down ballot races, let me let you know there are 33 U.S. senators up for re-election this fall, 33 of them. 23 of them are either Democrat or caucus with Democrats. They've got a greater chance to lose the Senate coming this fall than ever before. And if Biden doesn't carry Democratic votes at the top of the ticket, those 23 Democratic senators are all vulnerable. And that's concerning for them. So when I talk about down ballot voting, I'm talking U.S. Senate, because they could lose the Senate, and the House of Representatives. Many of the Democratic House members are subject to losing. We just saw what happened in New York. The guy lost in a primary. So those are some of the down ballot races. Gubernatorial races are also coming into play, but it's not for this because there's 11 gubernatorial races up this fall. Only 3 of them are Democrats. But watch this. Of the 3 Democrats who are up this fall, John Carney in Delaware is one of them. That's Joe's home state. If John Carney doesn't win re-election in Delaware, that's a terrible sign. A second Democratic governor up is Roy Cooper in North Carolina. That is a very, very important battleground state, important to re-election of Joe Biden. And then the third Democratic governor is Jay Inslee. He's in Washington, the state of Washington. Thursday night was not just a bad night. And now OPSCOM, or what they call OPSCOM, that's the Operation Communications Team, is saying the alternatives are worse. The alternatives of Joe Biden running for president are worse. And they're referring to Trump winning, of Kamala. They're intrinsically saying Kamala taking the first chair and anyone else replacing Joe Biden. Mark Weaver, you heard my thought on this whole thing. What's your take on my opinion?
There may be people out there who hope to pull that off. Here's the problem. Unless Joe Biden and, for that matter, Jill Biden, agree to step down, it's very difficult to take the nomination away from him. The money raised by the Biden campaign really can't be given to another campaign easily. And the
that's
delegates
key.
that have... Yeah, of course, it's more than $200 million. And the delegates earned in all these primaries. The primaries are over. All of those delegates were carefully chosen as Biden loyalists. They're not going to change over to somebody else because their first duty is to help with Joe Biden. So absent Joe Biden agreeing to step down, this is all just hot air. It's not going to change.
Mark, let's go down the rabbit hole real quick because it's important for the average guy to understand some of the nuances, and listeners need to know why things go down the way they do and how that impacts them. The fundraising element is really key. Remember, the Trump trial in New York was all about campaign election violations, right? Is what that was supposedly about. Well, here's the way that fundraising works. The amount of money that is in the war chest for quote-unquote Trump-Harris re-election 2024, a couple $100 million, that is earmarked for Joe Biden, Kamala Harris run for the office of the president in 2024. Now, if Joe Biden were not to be that candidate, those funds go to Harris for her campaign for president. But here's the problem. If she doesn't get that nomination, if Joe steps down and Joe goes away and she doesn't get that nomination, they cannot gift those funds to anyone else. I don't know what happens to those funds, but according to campaign finance rules, they can't give that. If they say Gavin Newsom's going to be the guy or Inslee or pick any name, they can't give that money to them. That money, that would be a campaign violation, which is exactly what they went after Trump for. Right?
Yeah, well, the trial in New York was not about campaign finance. That was Alvin Bragg's dodge on that. But your larger point is correct. The money cannot be moved. It would be almost worse if Kamala Harris became the nominee. She's about as popular as poison ivy in this country, and so that's not going to work out well for them. So your point is well taken.
At least there's a cure for poison ivy there.
Well, that's right. Seriously, it goes away after a while too.
Yeah. What's your gut feel? Do you think Biden is the guy on the ballot come November? Do you think he is? I don't. Do you think he is?
Well, absent the good Lord calling him home, which nobody wishes for.
Yeah.
I think he will cling to this position as long as he can. All of the reports that are leaking out right now show that they're blaming everybody but him for the debate performance. The Biden family, with Hunter Biden being the strongest voice next to Jill, the Biden family, they blame the makeup artist. They blamed the camera operators. They blamed the people who prepped Joe Biden. Everybody's getting blamed except for Joe Biden. That's not a mentality of somebody who's going to walk away from this nomination.
The one person who doesn't want Joe out of the race and his life depends on it, Hunter Biden. And that may be Bill. That may be what part of his driving Jill. Would you agree with that?
Well, certainly Joe Biden is desperate to pardon Hunter Biden or to commute any sentence he'll get in the gun trial or in the upcoming tax trial. I think that's certainly true. But Biden could do that on his last day in office, whether it would be him stepping away during this term or, leaving in January. So he still has the ability to do that. But all of Hunter Biden's relevance and money, and remember, Secret Service entourage, all of that goes away the day that Joe Biden is no longer president.
I want to open the phones, Mark, and see if there's callers, listeners who have some questions about a lot of this, because this is like a big old onion. The more you unpeel it, the more it stinks, and the more you find. So if you've got a comment, if you've got a question, if there's something on your mind that you're wondering why something happens or what we think, jump in. 800-288 9227. The phone number is 800-288-WBAP. My producer is Garrett tonight, Garrett Tarango. He'll answer the phone and tip me off on the calls. Coming up top of the hour, we're going to have Sean Allen in the newsroom. That's Mark Weaver joining us. We're talking about the news of the day. One of the stories happens to be the Joe Biden scenario. We'll get into some of the other stuff with Supreme Court coming up in a little bit. I'm Westside Jeff, and for Chris Krok, we'll be back in 4 minutes on News Talk 820 WBAP and now 93.3 FM. Westside Jeff is the name, and for Chris Krok. Chris is back next week. I'll be filling in tonight, tomorrow, and then Friday. You can catch me across social media if you want to interact with the show at Westside Jeff on X, formerly known as Twitter, also Facebook and Instagram. Or just pick up a phone and dial 800-288-9227. Joining me is Mark Weaver. Mark is a former spokesman with the United States Department of Justice in Washington. He worked under the Reagan administration. He's got some great stories about one-on-ones with coaching Ronald Reagan on television. Some of the things that he did, it's brilliant. It's just fascinating to listen to. Maybe we'll get to that in a little bit later. But he also, Mark, teaches constitutional law. So he's a professor of constitutional law at the Ohio State University Law School up in Columbus, Ohio, but also University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He's a wonderful author. He wrote a great book called A Wordsmith's Work. And if you like reading stories about failures and successes and how to overcome them, check it out. A Wordsmith's Work on Amazon. He penned an op-ed today in Newsweek magazine about today's Supreme Court ruling, which we'll get to in a few minutes. We're talking about all the big stories. One of those is the fallout from the Biden-Trump debate the other night and what's going to happen moving forward. Mark, I saw one political pundit today said on CNN, depending on polling over the next 2 weeks or so, this was a Democrat. He said, depending on polling over the next 2 weeks or so, if it's really, really bad news on what happens from polling and the Democrats and the voters and what their perceptions are, he said, quote, this could be the equivalent of a run on the banks effect with the Biden-Harris 2024 campaign if the polls are that bad. We got a couple callers I want to get to that tie into this. Let's start with Tom from Frisco. Tom, thanks for listening. You're on with Westside Jeff and Mark Weaver on News Talk 820 WBAP.
I've got a little different twist on why Jill and Hunter are so adamant that Joe stay in the race. They're afraid that whoever replaces Joe would not be able to win just because of all the chaos that it would create by taking him off the ballot. So they are praying they were probably going to cheat everywhere they can to keep him in office. And for one key reason, if Trump wins, imagine the Department of Justice and the FBI head that Trump will put in place that will probably look at every shell company that the Bidens created, dig into it, find out what all has really happened. And Joe, his wife, his brother, and his son are all going to end up in jail.
Tom, that's a legitimate question. Mark, you want to address that real quick? Because I want to get into the Supreme Court ruling after the top of the hour news also. What's your thought on what Tom had to say?
Well, under the Supreme Court's decision today, all of that is fair game because those are not part of the president's power. Helping your son corruptly do business with China and Ukraine and other oligarchs has nothing to do with presidential power. So Joe Biden could be prosecuted for those crimes. However, we know that Robert Hur said he didn't think a jury would convict him because he comes off as an elderly old man with a failing memory. And of course, depending on where you bring the case, like Washington, D.C., you get a very politically favorable jury. So it's possible under today's decision. It's just not likely, practically speaking, what it takes to convince a jury unanimously to convict.
Tom, any other questions there with regard to that, Tom?
Well, I agree with him as far as if it's handled in Washington, could they not take it to Texas or Florida or somewhere else, file it there, where they wouldn't have such a favorable jury? And I am also if it's really proven, and again, I think it could be proven if they dig deep enough, that these shell companies have been holding millions for the Biden family. And I'm not sure a lot of Democrats are even going to be real happy if that ends up being the case. So he might end up with a jury that, even in Washington, could commit him if the proof was there.
Yeah,
Mark,
I think that's a fair point. Yeah, well, I've been a part-time prosecutor for many years, and a prosecution can be brought anywhere the crime occurred, even if it's just one part of the crime. So it'll be fact-specific to know where these different crimes occurred. The key thing is that Joe Biden should recognize that what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and prosecutions brought against Joe Biden will be a lot more substantive than any of the prosecutions that have been brought against Donald Trump.
Tom, you bring up some really good points, and there's no doubt in my mind, my opinion is such that no doubt in my mind that Joe Biden is campaigning for his life, for his family. I think that's part of this. I totally agree with you. It's not only because he wants to be president of the United States, he wants to protect the family Biden name because there's so much to protect. I agree with you on that.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Tom, thank you for listening. Thanks for being a part of the show. Mark, this gets into and Tom brought up a good point about, and you did too, about the Supreme Court ruling today about the Trump immunity. And the Democrats are coming unhinged. AOC and several others have said they want to file charges against the Supreme Court to derail them. And the President of the United States came out a little while ago and made a speech in the White House about it. Let's get into that case after the top of the hour news. Again, top of the hour news, Sean Allen dropped a note on my desk from the newsroom. It said he's got a little more news coming up in a matter of minutes, about 2 minutes, about Supreme Court ruling on Trump. And we'll talk about it after Sean's news. But he's also got an update on the FEMA extending their dealing for Dallas residents to apply for storm recovery assistance. There's a lot of our residents right here in North Texas who have storm damage, and FEMA has an update, or Sean has an update on some of the filing that you can make. That's coming up in our news with Sean Allen in about 2 minutes. On the other side of that, we'll continue a conversation with Mark Weaver about the Supreme Court ruling today, the Biden administration, how this plays out. I'm Westside Jeff. That was Mark Weaver. I'm Westside Jeff, and for Chris Krok and News Talk 820 WBAP, and now on FM at 93.3.